Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ron, and today we are going to be going over the Crossbow Overclocks in Deep Rock Galactic. This will just be an overview and my opinions of them, as well as my first impressions. I actually do have a video up now about one of the particular overclocks called Bodkin points. If you'd like to go off and see that, it was a really fun video to make, and it's definitely one of my new favorite overclocks in this game. The crossbow has 6 overclocks in total as of right now, and there is 2 clean, 2 balanced, and 2 unstable. Starting out with the cleans, our first one is quick shot, and what quick shot does is increase the velocity of the bolt as well as increase your reload speed. And that's it. Both of these are really nice. The crossbow doesn't reload incredibly quick, but if you stack full reload speed on this, it is very fast. And with this now having 200% velocity rather than 100%, it makes so your bolts go much further with less drop off. So there's less of a need to really aim high at any point. Most of the time at 200% velocity, you're going to hit the target, or you're going to hit just below where you're aiming a lot of the time. You could take this with the 300% velocity mod in tier 3, I believe, and then have 300% velocity, but that's a bit overkill unless you're on a very large map. This one felt really strong to me. This one felt like one of the best ones for the crossbow because it just gave it what it needs. And if you like the base crossbow, then this one is great. If you don't like the base crossbow, you might find it to be a bit better with this just because of the faster reload speed. Our second clean overclock for the crossbow is called Specialist. This one increases the max number of special bolts that you can have, as well as it increases their effects. So your duration is increased as well as the amount that you have is increased, and you can actually get to the point of you having more special bolts than regular bolts, at least if you build 4 special bolts. And you're going with the pheromone bolts, I believe, because you can have 20 normal bolts or 21 normal bolts, and then 22 or 23 pheromone bolts. I don't remember the exact amount. You can have a lot of special bolts, which is very useful if you like stacking them up. The pheromone bolts are great for crowds because you can spread out pressure and make it so that the enemies are more likely to target each other than target you or target the team. You can also have more lightning bolts, which is great on things like elimination missions because you can slow down the dreadnoughts just by shooting these into it and easily get around to the back, or use that for your team to get around to the back, or just apply status effects if you need that for whatever reason, like if you have another scout with Zukovs, or if you have the GK2 with Bolts of Mercy, or just anybody that gets bonus damage when things are being electrocuted. It can be very nice there. And of course, you can have more chemical bolts so that you can potentially kill more enemies. The chemical bolts I've found to be the most difficult to use, at least on has 5 when there's a lot of bugs swarming around, just because of the time that it takes for them to go off. That being said, they're still pretty good, and having more of them is always a plus. This one felt great too. There's no downside to it. It's like a lot of clean overclocks. It's nice. And then for our first balanced overclock, we have Firebolts. This sets your bolts on fire, and anything that you hit with the firebolts can be set ablaze. This does take time though. It's not like the incendiary grenades where it goes off instantly and just lights fire everywhere. This hits, and if it kills the enemy's body will still be on fire and can still spread fire to other enemies nearby. Also, if you don't hit something directly, enemies running across it will still get burned by it and can still potentially be lit on fire, similar to how sticky flames work. This can also ignite any effects that require heat. So if there's a gas cloud from a Praetorian or an oppressor and you shoot a bolt through it, it will cause it to explode. As well as if you shoot the firebolt into sludge from the corrosive sludge pump, it will also light on fire. It's also really good against stationary targets because you can just light them on fire. So whether it be like a Spitballer or a Nexus, very easy to light on fire, and the more bolts you have in an enemy, the faster the heat will build up, and the more likely you are to catch it on fire. Downsides to having fire bolts are that your bolts are no longer retrievable, and you also lower your damage. The damage output usually doesn't matter because you're dealing enough damage with the fire, I've found, so it is rather nice for applying status effects. I find that this one is pretty good if you have somebody like a driller running a sludge pump on your team. You can set this up very consistently to burn crowds with it that way. Other than that, it's really good against single immobile targets, and it's pretty good against like oppressors and Praetorians. My first impression of Firebolts is that it's useful, but I don't know how useful it really is because the fire effect doesn't build up that quickly on robots. It can be good against like Nemesis because you can stick quite a few into him and keep the heat gauge up, especially if you have other people on your team running heat as well. So in that case, it is really good, but this does feel like a more supportive overclock than anything. It can work well against crowds, just because you can light them on fire and spread fire throughout. It's really good with the IFG grenades. You can also use it in combination with the Cryo grenades if you'd like, similar to how you use white phosphorus shells in the shotgun to apply the thermal shock. Our other clean overclock is Cryobolts. These ones work very similar to Firebolts and have the same downside, so your bolts are no longer retrievable and you do reduce damage. However, these are for ice. So these will stick in an enemy and then will deal the cold buildup to the enemy that it's stuck in as well as all enemies around it. And once it hits the full amount, it will freeze them. This one I find to be pretty good. This one will probably be better overall than Firebolts, I would say. Just because when an enemy is frozen, that's a little bit more useful for you by yourself. It is still useful for the team. And it does depend on team setup because you could still combine this with something like the Cryo cannon and then just build up the frost faster. So again, really good against stationary targets, very good at building up frost quickly on things like oppressors or Praetorians. You can freeze a Praetorian pretty quick with these if you just keep shooting it with it. If you tailor your build to either one of these or if you tailor it around the team, both of these can be pretty good, I would say. And then we move on to our unstable overclocks. Our first one is called Triforce volley. This lets us fire out 3 bolts at once. This way we deal extra damage, although these bolts do reduce damage based on how many hit, I believe. And this comes at a slower reload speed and you can not pick up your bolts. I'm not entirely sure all the changes because it just recently got changed as of like making this video. With this one, you do get to fire out 3 bolts, which can do really high burst damage. You can kill big things very quick with it, especially if you combine it with like the magnetic shafts tier 5 mod, I believe. And then with the IFG or with the electric bolts in it, you can stack up a really high amount of burst damage that way on a single target. So it's great for dealing with like oppressors, Praetorians, really any large target. And it can work pretty decently against crowds, just because you are firing into the crowd and you're likely going to kill at least 3 of the smaller enemies. But you can run through your ammo pretty quick with this one. And it can be a little bit punishing if you're trying to use this at longer ranges against certain enemies because of how much the bolts split. So at like close to medium range is where this one really shines. Outside of that, it's okay, at least if you're firing it at crowds or a big enough enemy. So Triforce volley, I would say I like it. It's best on certain missions. It definitely has advantages in a certain play style. So I think I'm alright with this one too. And then our last overclock is the Bodkin points, which this one is by far my favorite overclock for the crossbow. This one lowers your overall damage and makes it so you reload slower. However, the upside is that your bolts can now penetrate and they bounce into other enemies. If you build damage with this, going with the broadhead bolts in tier 2, you can still one-shot, body shot regular grunts. And you can nearly body shot slashers with this too. I think it will headshot them, but it's kind of unlikely that the bounce will hit something in the head. The bounce works very similar to magic bullets or bullet hell, where it will seek out an enemy once you have hit the first enemy. It will go in a straight line towards that enemy though, so if there's any terrain in the way, it will likely hit that and stop. But in crowds, it can clear up crowds pretty quick. It can work fairly well against big things too. And yeah, I think right now it's probably one of my favorites just because of the way that it functions. It's really cool. So these are all the overclocks for the crossbow right now, in my opinions, as of right now with them. We will be doing like tier lists of these and stuff like that once I have been able to test them out quite a bit more. And once I've kind of gotten the other overclocks, we're going to make a giant list of just all the overclocks in the game. That should be a lot of fun. I hope you guys are looking forward to that. Thanks everybody for watching this. I really do appreciate it. Tell me how you're liking the crossbow down in the comments below. I know some people find it a little bit underwhelming. Some people find it really fun. Some people are somewhere in the middle. And special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over at Patreon. They get early access to videos like this, and if you would like to be a part of it, you can. There are links down in the description. Thanks everybody who does that. It really does help out the channel a lot. I hope you guys all have a great day, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye!